early spring, both sides focused on establishing their supply lines and increasing their tank power, fully aware that over the previous 2 years there had been 5 swinging pendulums across the desert, each ultimately failing because the victors in each battle lacked the tank strength to consolidate and exploit their success. Lessons were learned from the previous pendulum swings. British armored divisions began re-equipping with Grant tanks armed with 75mm guns, corresponding to the German Panzer IV, and reorganized their support to expedite maintenance and repairs during battle, an area where Axis tanks had a clear advantage. The relationships were also reorganized with infantry and artillery, while the commander of the Allied air forces in the Middle East, Arthur Tedder, introduced a new strategy aimed at utilizing the Desert Air Force during the battle to support ground troops rather than to destroy opposing air forces. A concept for a new fighter bomber was developed, and Air Vice Marshal Arthur Conyngham, the commander of the Desert Air Force, moved with his staff to the Army Commander's camp to improve coordination. In the meantime, Rommel was building his supply lines as quickly as he could. He knew that he could attack before the 8th Army was ready if he took advantage of the proximity of his fleet to create supply lines faster than O'Connor, who depended on a route of 23,000 kilometers around the Cape of Good Hope. By the end of May, Rommel was ready. Before him on the defensive line at Gazala were the 1st South African Division, close to the coast, the 50th, Northumbrian, Infantry Division, to the left, and the 1st Free French Brigade, located far to the left, at Bir Hakeim. The British 1st and 7th Armoured Divisions waited behind the main line as mobile counterattack forces, while the 2nd South African Division garrisoned Tobruk, and the 5th Indian Infantry Division, which arrived in April to replace the 4th Indian Infantry Division, was switched to reserve. Rommel's plan for Operation Venice consisted of his tanks executing a flanking maneuver south of the fortified box of Bir Hakeim. On the left flank of his army, the Italian 132nd Armoured Division Ariete was to neutralize the box of Bir Hakeim, while on the right flank, the 21st Armoured Division and the 15th Armoured Division would advance north beyond the defensive lines of the 8th Army to attract attention and destroy British tanks and cut off units from the Gazala line. On the right edge of the attacking army, the German 90th Light Infantry Division of the African Corps was supposed to advance on El Alamein, south of Tobruk, creating supply lines along the Gazala line and potentially directing reinforcements to the Tobruk area, simulating a strong armored force with the dust of vehicles, aircraft engines and propellers mounted on trucks. Meanwhile, the second half of the Italian XX Motorized Corps and the Italian 101st Motorized Division Trieste were supposed to clear a path through the minefield to the north of the Bir Hakeim box, near the Sidi Mufta box, to create a supply route for the tanks. Rommel expected that, by engaging British tanks, he would capture El Adem, Ed Douda, and Sidi Rezegh by evening, just as he would capture the defending box. Knightsbridge is about 40 kilometers northeast of Bir Hakeim. Then he could take a position with his tanks the next day to begin the offensive west of the defensive positions of the 8th Army, the defensive positions between Gazala and Alam Hamza, coordinating the attack with the advancing Italian Corps X and XXI from the west. At 1400 hours on May 26, the Italian X and XXI Corps, after concentrating heavy artillery, began a direct attack on positions in the center of the Gazala line. In order to deceive, small units of the Afrika Corps and the XX Mobile Corps were attached to assault groups to create the impression that all Axis forces were participating in this offensive. The deception was reinforced by additional groups of mobile units continuing to move north towards the attack point. However, that evening, under the cover of darkness, all armored and mobile groups returned to their assembly point at the southern end of the Gazala line. On the night of May 27, Rommel personally led groups of the Africa Tank Army, the Afrika Corps, the Italian XX Motorized Corps, and the 90th Light Infantry Division in a brilliant but risky flanking maneuver around the southern end of the Allied line, hoping that the enemy's minefields would protect his flank and rear. Rommel's plan was thwarted due to Bir Hakeim. The Ariete and Trieste divisions of the 20th Motorized Corps and units of the 21st Armored Division were delayed for 3 hours by the 3rd Indian Motorized Brigade of the 7th Armored Division, which halted them 4 miles southeast of Bir Hakeim and inflicted heavy casualties before forcing them to retreat. The box of Bir Hakeim was defended by the 1st Brigade of Free France under the command of Marie-Pierre Koenig, which turned out to be a greater problem than Rommel had anticipated, and the Ariete division was unable to secure its position, suffering heavy losses from French 75mm guns during the fighting. Further east, the 15th German Panzer Division encountered the English 4th Armoured Brigade of the 7th Armoured Division, which had been ordered to go south to support the 3rd Indian and 7th Motorized Brigades, and inflicted heavy losses on it, but also suffered significant losses from 75mm guns on the newly arrived Grant tanks. The 4th Armoured Brigade then moved towards El Adem and spent the night near the supply base of Belém to the east of El Adem. By the end of the morning, the Axis armoured units advanced more than 40 kilometers north, but by noon their attacking force diminished when they encountered the 1st Armoured Division. A heavy battle began, in which both sides suffered heavy losses and the Axis units were halted. On the right flank of the advancing Axis forces, the 90th Light Infantry Division engaged in combat with the 7th Motorized Brigade near Retma and forced it to retreat eastward towards Bir el Gubi. Resuming its offensive towards El Adem, the 90th Light Infantry Division attacked the headquarters of the 7th Armoured Division early in the morning near Bir Bulda, defeating it and capturing several important military personnel, including the division commander Frank Maservi, although he pretended to be a Batman and escaped. However, the disruptions caused by this event meant that the division was deprived of effective command for the next 2 days. As planned, the 90th Light Infantry Division reached the El Adem area by mid-morning and captured several supply bases. The Allies were slow to respond, but in the afternoon a fierce battle ensued. The next day, however, the 4th Armoured Brigade was dispatched to El Adem, and the 90th Light Infantry Division was pushed back to the southwest. The tank battles lasted for 3 days and, since Bir Hakeim still held out, the Afrika Tank Army found itself encircled, with Bir Hakeim to the south, Tobruk to the north, vast minefields on the initial front line of the Allies to the west, and being attacked by Allied tanks from the north and east. By the evening of May 31st, Rommel's supply situation had become desperate. The Cavalry Armoured Division Ariete, which had been ordered to defend the German rear, was repelling repeated attacks from British armoured brigades on May 29 and during the first week of June. From the German report on these events, during the first 10 days of our offensive against the French, the English remained remarkably calm. The Ariete Division was only attacked by them on June 2, but it held its ground stubbornly. After a counterattack by the 21st Armoured Division, the situation became quiet again.